So I made the pinch pot on Friday. I worked on it on Saturday. Yesterday I did a little bit more smoothing, and I'm using a different kind of clay. I need to be careful. Once you attach the coil foot, you do not want to store the project right side up because you may smush the foot. So in the video, she said that if your foot is too fragile or too moist, you want to store it upside down. And I store my project upside down until I know everything is leather hard. Okay? So the other thing I want to tell you is you might get the coil foot attached and you might not be happy with it. Maybe you used the tool too much and scraped off too much clay when you were trying to join the seam. And also, don't worry too much about the measurements, but mine's almost 3 inches, and I believe it's 4.5 wide. So I've pretty much met the dimensions. Also, I need to account for shrinkage. So I'm going to show you this. You can take it off. So I'm going to take this one off. I'm going to take the end of my metal rib tool. And I'm just doing this to show you that if you make mistakes, you can always remedy them during construction, but you can't go back after I fire it. So I'm going to just start scraping this coil foot off. And some of you are probably like, no, why would you do that? It looks so good. Because we can always make changes. And then I'm going to take the rib tool and just scrape off all of that extra clay and flip and try to level out the bottom. And then flipping the tool around to the rounded side and getting rid of. And then going back in with my sponge and bringing it back to a flat bottom. And then I'm just going to take my hand and go over it, smooth it a little bit more. And now it's pretty much back to normal. I'm going to take this tool and kind of reshape and compress the clay to avoid air bubbles. So Moses said he had an air bubble, and maybe you noticed an air bubble too. So with all these little scraps of clay I took off, I'm actually just going to chuck them into my slip bucket and I can break them up later. But with the air bubble, if you have this tool, you can poke an air bubble and then blend it. Or you could take this tool, which everybody has, and you can kind of stab it and then blend out the bubble. Okay? All right, so a couple other things. If the project is too dry, you're going to want to use a damp sponge and cover the entire exterior with a pass of light moisture. If you're like, darn, this thing, I did not cover it as hard as a rock, you can take a paper towel. Let me get a fresh one. Okay, so fresh paper towel. Dipping the paper towel into my water bucket. Wringing it out. And it's not dripping, but it is saturated. And then putting it on top of the form, wrapping it like a little blanket around the lip of the form. And this is if it's too dry. We don't want to attach a coil foot if the project's too dry. Now, let's think about the opposite. Maybe you just made this and it's too wet and you don't want to attach the coil foot just yet. So you can flash dry it outside, and at an hour like this, it's not very bright, so you could leave it outside for, I don't know, an hour. Or you can just leave it out in the open to get air for as long as you need. I wouldn't leave it out overnight, but maybe a couple hours at max, and then it should be a little bit more firm. So this is holding its shape. If I try to move it, it's not quite leather hard. I can slightly move it, but it's holding its shape pretty good. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to the next steps with you. I'm gonna get this out of the way and leave it upside down. I rolled the coil foot earlier, about an hour ago. It's still pretty moist. I wanna tell you one more thing before we roll our coils together. If you just get to here and you need to stop where you are, take a break, or maybe come back to it, I would coil this up. This is pretty long. Wrap it in the paper towel to ensure that it's moist, and you can store it right inside to keep it the same moisture content, and then store the pinch pot upside down and wrap it in plastic. The coil will dry out really fast, within a couple hours for sure. All right, so let's get some clay about the size of a lemon. So this is a piece of clay about the size of a lemon that I smushed in my hand. I'm gonna grab a couple more pieces, and I want you to do the same, just so I can roll more than one coil. Now, if the clay is fresh out of the bag, you don't need to wedge it, but I actually used this clay earlier, and then I just smushed it up and put it in my water. So I'm gonna give it a slight wedging because it's actually a little moist. And then I'm gonna smush it in my hand, like so. And then I'm gonna do like she did in the video and try to elongate. Okay, so I've got one for backup, and I'm gonna actually cut this one in half with my wooden knife, and I'm gonna just use part of it. Okay, so I want to ensure that the coil's round. I'm gonna make a full rotation from the bottom of my palm to the top of my fingertip on both hands, but I usually start with just one hand. Somewhat of a firm pressure, and if you get a flat piece like that, you can hit it on the tall edge of the table or your workboard. And so I'm standing up and using the leverage of my hips to brace myself and really lean forward. So yeah, Marisol, definitely want to add water. And I would use this tool here to smooth it out. So blending your bumps like so, and then go back and watch the pinch pot lecture video on how to add Band-Aids to fill the holes. That would be a good way to eliminate some of those bumps, but don't add a lot of water. You want to add just a little bit of water at a time. All right, now I'm working with both hands, and I'm noticing some cracking. And so I'm going to add a little water as I'm rolling. So I'm going to dip my sponge directly into the water. And you don't want to do this unless you see cracking right away. And I'm just dragging this sponge along the coil. And then continuing on. Fingers spread apart. And also going off the feeling of the clay. Okay, so if you see any lines, which I don't on mine, but sometimes if we're pushing too hard or we're not making a full rotation, we can get some creases. So actually, let me show you what that looks like. If you're doing it incorrectly, you'll know. So if I just go like this, and I'm adding too much pressure and I'm not moving around, and I'm not making a full rotation, it's kind of like this. I'm going to get some really weird thin areas, and then I'm going to get some overlapped areas. And then I'm going to try to fix that by hitting it on the table and doing a full turn and avoiding those thin areas. And only pressing on the thicker areas, keeping my fingers in equal width apart. And then you might get some cracking where you press too hard. You can just break that part off. And we don't want it to get too skinny. So about the width of my pinky. And just about there. Also, I can use my rib tool to smooth any folds or creases. Okay. And I'm going to go over it one last time with the water so that when I go to round this into a circle before cutting, it does not crack. Okay, so there's number one. Right, I'm going to move that aside and I'm going to do another one. So I always do 2 to 3, even for my own work, even as a professional, because I want to pick the best coil. Same thing when I make a mug. If I have one mug, I make probably 3 handles and then I pick the best one. You might not have the drive or the passion yet, but I hope I give you some buy-in. Once you see that first project fired, you're going to be stoked. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about, these little folds and creases that happen sometimes as a result of uneven pressure. I just blend them out with my metal rib. Okay. All right, so there's coil number 2. Again, doing the pinky check. I don't want it any thicker than my pinky or any thinner really, because then it's gonna be too fragile. Okay, so I have 2 coils. This end's a little thick, so I'm just gonna cut that off. I'm not gonna need that much. Okay, so I'm gonna let you guys practice. And I'm gonna take these scraps of clay and I'm gonna break them up and put them into my slip bucket. So you can always be adding to the slip bucket. So let's take about 5 minutes to practice those techniques. Any questions or anybody want to show me? Totally fine. Otherwise, go ahead and apply what you saw. And Marisol, you might want to, if your project's cracking or too dry, apply the wet paper towel blanket or just a wet, lightly damp rag. You're welcome. Moses, were you able to get your air bubble out by poking it? Good, very good. All right, I want you to refocus your attention back on the screen. So we are almost nearing the end of our class. We've got about 15 minutes left. So I want to go over the next steps so that I can also incorporate these in a video that you can watch back. So I have 3 coils to choose from, and I only have 1 pot. Okay, if the paper towel is too damp, you might get a little cracking that you can smear with your finger there, boom. And so that's the one that I just wrapped in a moist paper towel. It actually didn't need moisture because it was not dry. I'm actually going to work with this one. It looks like the best one. Or is it this one? No, I think I'm going to go for this guy. Okay. So I need to measure before I attach. So I have my form here. And I want to overlap where I'm going to cut to ensure that I have a nice clean place to attach the 2 ends. So I've measured, and it looks like this on the side. And I'm going to take either this tool, if you have the knife tool, perfect, or this is a tool everyone has, so let me use the rib tool. I'm going to use the flat side of it. Where those 2 overlap, I'm just going to slice it without interfering with my pot. Remove, take off the 2 scraps. And I can break these up and put them into my slip bucket. Okay. Now I need to slip and score these two pieces together before I attach them to my pot. So I'm going to get my pot out of the way. And I'm going to get my toothpick tool. And let me bring this view a little closer. I'm going to score, not gently. I want to rough up the clay surface on both sides. And then from there, I'm going to get some slip. So let's look at my slip bucket. Speckled buff slip. So this is a different kind of clay body that I'm using. And so I need a special slip for that. So I'm going to reach in here. And this hasn't been mixed up in a while. So yuck, but I'm going to really mix it up. And I'm looking for this stuff. Even though it might be a little bit chunky when I smear it, it's going to serve as a great glue. Now before I attach, I want to keep my hands clean. So I'm going to wipe my hands with a rag. And so Moses was asking earlier, how do I apply the slip? I can use a Q-tip. If you have a paintbrush, you can use a paintbrush. You could also use your finger, but it's nice to have clean hands when you're joining. So that's not enough slip. Let me get a little more. That's nice and chunky and gooey. So I'm just going to put some on one side, some on the other side. And it shouldn't be dripping, so that's plenty. And then I'm going to stick those two together by pressing them. And the slip's going to come out the sides. And then I'm going to join them by just rubbing my finger across the top, the inside and the outside, and then flipping it over. And doing the same thing. And then grabbing my rib tool and gently gliding it over each side. And then sponge. Okay, good. All right, so now I need to mark where I'm going to put the coil foot ring. So I've already measured. I'm going to make myself a little guide so I don't overscore and have to clean up all the marks. So I'm just going to drag my tool in a few places, my scoring tool on the inside and the outside. And that way I know where to score. And going back with the scoring tool. Some people score with a fork, some people score with the needle tool. Okay, now I need to score the foot ring. Scoring both parts. And if you don't score enough, say you just score like this, boop, it's not going to do anything. So really roughing up the clay surface. That is the definition of scoring. I always cross hatch, so going one direction, so making little X's, and then the other direction. So now I've scored both pieces, so now it's time for slip. And really trying to get the slip into the grooves that I've scored. And you can see it sliding into those grooves and distributing. Now I do this. I score again after I've added the slip. I just double do it because the worst thing is to work super hard and then get cracking. I'm going to add some slip to my foot ring. Okay, now I'm going to line those two up. I'm going to press a little bit gently, not smushing. And then I'm going to take my finger and clean up the extra slip. Okay, so I have this. It's pretty rough. I've just started the attaching process. So I can use my finger or this tool, and I'm going to grab this tool here, hold it at an angle, and use the wooden knife to drag the clay downward. And I'm doing this carefully. I don't want to dig the tool into the clay because then it distorts the shape. I go back. Really try to do that evenly. Okay, now for the inside, I'm going to use the other end of this, and I'm going to support with my opposite hand. That way I'm not moving the coil out of place. I want it to stick on there. That's the whole goal. So it may be on there, but it's not looking very pretty. I see a lot of tool marks. So let me get my slip out of the way and just get a little water on my finger. I'm coming in here and first starting with the inside. Trying not to push the coil foot out of place, but just gently massaging, just like you would if you were putting a band-aid of clay to fill a hole. Going over the inside, now eliminating the water. I'm going to do the same thing on the outside. And evaporating the water. Lastly, I'm going to take my fingers and use my index finger along with my thumb to kind of pinch and also even out the coil foot, just like I did with the lip of the pinch pot itself. Again, trying not to move the coil foot out of shape. And then one last pass of the sponge for now. And so homework is to smooth and refine. Make sure that attachment's on there. I'm going to eliminate the water, and then it will firm up just like your pinch pot did. So if you made the pinch pot on time, you're realizing that the clay does kind of firm up and start to take shape. Same thing will happen with the coil foot. And if your pinch pot's too wet, let it dry a little bit before you attach the foot. If it's too dry, add a paper towel blanket and come back to it after you're done rolling the coil, and it should be moist enough to add that coil foot. Okay, so I want to also show you what to do with the scraps. You can mush them up and put them in water. I'm going to take all these coils I'm not going to use, and I'm going to smash them up. And I'm going to dunk them in the water and put them back in my bag so that when I come back to those pieces in a couple of days, they're ready for use. And then I'm going to take my sponge and my dirty water, and I'm going to clean all my tools and dry them. I don't want the tools to rust or the wood to split.
Miss I.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are we supposed to be doing like this the design on it as well right now, or do we have to wait till it hardens more?
Oh, for the chop?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the very last step. So tomorrow we'll work on the texture, and then the signature is going to be at the very end. That's a great question. So wait on that. So right now I just want you to focus on the form and the foot, and then we'll do the texture tomorrow and Thursday. And then Friday we'll be finishing touches if you still need extra time, unless you are ready to finish up Thursday. So that's a great question, Alexia. Okay, so I'm going to store my projects upside down, and once I get it to a really good stage, and I need a break, which I've been doing this all day, so I definitely am going to take a little break. I'm going to wrap it in my plastic. So I've cleaned my workboard, I've cleaned all my tools, I wedged my scraps. Little pieces like this you can tear up and keep adding to your slip bucket. And then I'm going to put it in my plastic bag, not one but two, making sure I'm wrapping it like so and keeping it in the workable stage for now.